everyone, Kevin here once again with my 1, 2, 3 cents, and just went over the WWE's list on their website today. I think they may have published it yesterday actually, but the 50 greatest stars in WCW. And you know, of course, whenever you make a list of the greatest, there's going to be controversy that is generated from it, and I'm just going to weigh in and throw my opinion out there on a couple of names that are on the list and a couple of names that aren't on the list, actually more than a couple. And I realized that there was only 50 and it was hard to narrow this down, and it really kind of goes into your perspective too of when you classify WCW versus NWA, because there was obviously a distinction, but I really felt like they left out a lot of guys from like the mid to late 80s off this list and focused more on the guys that were around during the Monday Night Wars era, if you will. So, first of all, Dennis Rodman's on this list, and I shake my head. And, I read some of the comments on WWE.com's website, and I think most of us are in agreement. Dennis Rodman didn't belong anywhere near that list. I wouldn't have even put him in the list of 100 greatest stars in WCW. So, that's the big one there for me, anyway. He was number 48. I don't really have a problem with anybody else that's on the list, but I guess to say that and then say, well, why aren't these guys on it is kind of a contradiction. And if I probably sat down and looked at it a little closer and examined it, and I could have moved stuff. But I like the way that they included some of the cruiserweights, which is something WWE tends to look over. And, it was a diverse list for sure, but there was no Magnum TA, who was the United States champion a couple of different times in WCW or NWA. Really one of those guys that I think coulda, shoulda, woulda had he not been in that accident back in 1986. I think he would have definitely taken the title from Flair and run with it. And Flair, by the way, was number 2 on the list, and I don't have a problem with that. Sting was number 1, which if you look at it from a franchise player perspective, if you will, Sting was with WCW really for the most part of his wrestling career. Ric Flair had left briefly to wrestle for the WWF back in 91 to early 1993. So I can understand them going with Sting as the number 1 guy there, and he held the title several times as well. Of course, in my opinion, Flair is the icon and always will be, but I can go with Sting. And it's interesting that Sting has now showed up on 2 WWE.com associated articles in the last month. So he was added to their alumni list earlier this month, and I posted a video about that as well. Lots of people checked that out and kind of weighed in on that as well. Some other names off the list that kind of surprised me were Nikita Koloff, multi-time United States Heavyweight Champion, held the NWA Tag Team titles as well, was part of the Superpowers with Dusty Rhodes, who was also not on the list. And of everybody not on the list, I think Dusty Rhodes should have been on the list and probably in the top 10, quite honestly. 3-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion, United States Champion, TV Champion, Tag Team Champion. The guy did it all. He's an icon. He is the American Dream. What more can you say? And another name missing from that list, a member of the Four Horsemen, Tully Blanchard. Not exactly sure why he was kept off the list too. They had Eric Bischoff on the list, which was interesting because they called this the 50 greatest stars of WCW. So technically, I guess he was a star. I would have liked to have seen this focus more on the wrestlers and maybe even thrown in some tag teams. The Road Warriors weren't on the list. Booker T was on there individually, but with Stevie Ray collectively as Harlem Heat, probably one of WCW's best tag teams. And somebody like Sid, and I'm not knocking Sid, I've met him several times, he's a great guy. Number 14 on the list, kind of surprising, and Steve Austin, stunning Steve Austin, was number 15. I would have probably had those guys further up on the list, not so close to the top 10, and Big Van Vader, not in the top 10, which kind of surprised me as well. He was ranked number 11. I think he probably belongs somewhere in the top 10, but again, you've got to shuffle guys out, and I didn't look at this critically enough to say who should have been or who would have been my top 10. I was glad to see Bobby Eaton made the list, though. That impressed me. A former WCW TV champion and multi-time tag team champion with Sweet Stan Lane as the Midnight Express. So what did you think of the list? Go ahead and weigh in here and let me know. And thanks for watching my 1, 2, 3 cents.